Hello, we are the Dirty Birds. My name is Evelyn and I use she, her pronouns.
I'm Rachel and I use she, her pronouns.
I'm Antonia. I use she, her pronouns.
And I'm Ian and I use he, him pronouns. And today we're going to be discussing Fredric Jameson's article, The Aesthetics of Singularity, his understanding of postmodern art and how it relates to the film we watched on Tuesday, Exit Through the Gift Shop by Banksy.
Okay. Do you want to start, Ian? Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. So we each have two examples, and then we're going to do like a round robin. We're going to first read the quote from the essay that we have. We're going to explain it a little, and then we're going to introduce an example that we have from the film, and then relate it back to that piece of the essay, and then kind of discuss that. So the first one that I have comes from page 107 of Jameson's essay, and it says, also excuse my voice, I am sick, but it says, but we must remember that with the transformation of the museum itself into a popular and mass cultural space, visited by enthusiastic crowds and advertising its new exhibitions as commercial attractions, these new kinds of art objects are very far from attracting the hostility that famously greeted the older works of the modern period. So my understanding of that excerpt from Jameson's essay is that art in the postmodern world is significantly less critical, and the postmodern pieces are significantly less subject to the hate and like trivialization by bodies of people that they were prior to postmodernism, because like the spaces that they occupy, museums, things like that, they're one, more accessible to the general public, and two, they're kind of commercialized to embody like this enthusiasm and this fun activity that you could do with your family and friends. So a time that I observed this in the film is when what's his name? Thierry,
yeah.
Thierry. When Thierry has the opening night of his art gallery, it's super sensationalized. Like we see behind closed doors, and like that it's kind of all this weight is kind of weighing on him and the rest of his team. But on the outside world, it's super sensationalized. People are talking about it. It's like kind of garnered this enthusiasm that has never been like there before. He's a new artist and he kind of doesn't have any former accolades to like present to the general public, but like the exhibition itself, just the physical space, it's being advertised as like this one in a lifetime experience. And then in response, when there's a bunch of people being recorded that are like being asked what they think of his art, not one person has a negative thing to say about it. The things they say are like, oh, it's wonderful. Like, I think museums should have more stuff like this. Nobody's doing it like him. Things of that nature, like, oh, this is amazing. And it kind of relates to what Jameson is saying in his essay about postmodernism and how the art that like occupies these spaces, it's very commercialized. Like he turned this into an event that is to be talked about. And if you're like talking about it, then it can't be bad, which is kind of like my interpretation and how it relates to his essay. What do you guys think?
I was actually, oh, sorry, Rachel,
you
can
go
first.
You can go. Oh, well, I was just gonna sort of mention how I thought it was really interesting how it seemed like a natural progression of a lot of the street artists that he was talking about to somehow end up in a gallery or doing an exhibition. Like it was sort of, you get to a certain point and the more professional thing to do is to then not change your art, but take that art and just put it in this other space. And I feel like that sort of goes to your point, Ian, about just the way that those spaces have been sort of changed over time and how people view them and enter them and what they're thinking as they enter them, about the artist and about the art. Kind of goes to Jameson's point there.
I also feel like I didn't put enough emphasis on the fact that like they weren't really that critical of the art that he was presenting. So I just want to reiterate that like it was very much like an activity. Like they broke down the gate to get inside, but there wasn't any like real profound analysis, especially given that like we saw the process that went into it. He kind of just flipped through a bucket and was like, here, put like a toy gun in this guy's hands, put a toy gun in Elvis' hands. Oh, put a Batman mask on this farmer. Like like how we discussed in class, it's cleverly stupid and nobody's critical of it because it's just commercialized and it's renowned for the activity and enthusiasm surrounding it. There's no criticism really involved. And then he sold over $1 million worth of that art, which is crazy.
Yeah. No, that entire like art show that he was having, I also like use that in one of my quotes as like an example. But I think along the lines of just that entire example, like what you're saying, something that I was thinking about that I feel like relates to this, me trying to introduce this and taking like 20 minutes to do it. Basically what I'm gonna say is that I thought it was interesting that like the one part of the film where Banksy creates the art on the West Bank wall in Gaza, like in Palestine, and it's like the like I'm trying to figure out how to say this exactly. It's almost like the actual art that he created isn't necessarily like anything that would spark criticism. Like the actual art of itself was just like a girl standing like on the beach, or like two little boys standing on the beach, and then like the sky behind them. But it's like the act of like where he did it and how he did it that was kind of like the politicalness, I guess, behind it, which I think is like I don't like, I'm trying to like thread exactly how this relates, but I think that it does kind of relate because it's like the actual work is like postmodern, and if part of postmodernity, I think is how you'd say that, is like the commercialized aspect and like the just kind of like not that all art has to be like criticized and it has to like have a deeper meaning, but kind of like the lack of deep meaning behind postmodern art. But I feel like you can also find it in different areas, because something that I was thinking, sorry, I'm kind of rambling, but something that I was kind of wondering watching the film was like if his art show was actually like postmodern, just because I think, I mean, now that you're saying this and like you're bringing light to like this section of the article, like it makes sense. But I just think like the whole commercialization behind it, maybe it's just like not particularly to my liking, but I feel like it just takes so much away from art in general. And like even though the art itself is still kind of like the goofy, like weird, not really serious aspects of postmodernity, it's still kind of like straying, I feel like, from any sort of cleverness, and it's just like goofy. Like it just like it doesn't, it's not clever at all. It's just kind of like dumb, at least in my mind. That's what I was thinking. But yeah, if any of that made sense. That was kind of a lot of words, but yeah.
No, I understand what you're saying. He was like it's almost like he was like, I like couldn't take him seriously the whole time because he was just, the way he was describing his works of art, where he was just mimicking what other people were doing and what he thought, like, oh, I'm going to replace this and this because I saw someone else do that, and like that's what I should be doing. Like it just, I agree, it took away from art, and it's like that, it's, I don't want to call that like an art show because like he wasn't even the artist. Like it's yeah, it was wild, but
It feels like performance art, kind of, just the whole.
Yeah, I would agree. I don't know if anybody else has anything to say about this, but one of my first quote I feel like can kind of be tied into what we're talking about, if you guys don't mind if I share it.
Yeah.
Unless anybody has anything else. Okay, cool. So the first quote that I picked was on page 111 of the Jameson article, and it says, but now we see a little better what they really are, talking about like postmodern works of art. They're not objects because they are in fact events. The installation and its kindred productions are made not for posterity, nor even for the permanent collection, but rather for the now and for a temporality, sorry, oh my gosh, I can't speak, that may be rather different from the old modernist kind. Okay, so I interpreted this as saying, that was a little bit jumbled because of my speaking, but I interpreted this as saying is like essentially the like postmodern work, kind of what I was saying about, because one of the examples that I felt like kind of related to this from the film was the art that Banksy made on the wall in Palestine. I think that it is essentially gathering that the art itself is more about like the events surrounding the art rather than like the literal art in and of itself. So like hence why I was kind of inferring that part of postmodernity is kind of like not necessarily the politicalness behind it, but kind of like the things surrounding it rather than like the actual thing, if that kind of makes sense. I also just think this was also another reason why I just kind of like didn't really think that Terry, I think is how you say that. How his art I felt like wasn't totally postmodern, just because I think it was so like, it first of all was for money. Like I think he was doing the whole thing for like monetary gain. Like I don't think that he really was doing it because he was like, I just love to make this art. Like it felt very like when he was on the phone with like some of the art buyers. I don't know the word. I can't think of the word right now, but he was like requesting like just insane amounts of money for this work that like he kind of put no effort into. And I think that his art just kind of lacked, like it said in the quote, just like they're for the now and they're for like the current event that's happening. It's not necessarily, I don't know if I'm totally making sense with what I'm saying, but basically I just think that it kind of lacked the like, it wasn't timeless, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Maybe. I don't know if any of that makes sense. You guys can say how you feel about that if you have thoughts or opinions. That's kind of where I was going though. Yeah.
I feel like I have a little bit to say about this because that was actually my second
Oh, really?
quote from the essay. But yeah, I have like jotted down for my interpretation that it's not the creation of something permanent, but rather of something that speaks to the now. So like the things that are happening in the now, created for immediacy and with respect to now rather than for permanence. So the example that I have that like I think speaks to the quote in a little bit of a different way than to what you were saying, but yours doesn't make a lot of sense. The graffiti artist Zeus, he spray paints the shadows of objects at night. So like to me, that was like relating things to the now, because obviously like in the sunlight, that spray painting isn't really going to make sense. It's not like a permanent installation of art that will make sense throughout all time. It's only going to make sense like in the now, in the specific moment where this lamppost is casting the shadow of this park bench, and then I'm able to spray paint the shadow of it. So to me, that's kind of one part that I took away. And then also another example, I also had written down how Banksy's art involves issues that concern the now. So I definitely know what you're talking about. They're like events and they're speaking to the events of the now. Like the West Bank wall, like there wasn't any critical like piece of his art that made it so substantial. And like even when the news media outlets were covering it, it wasn't a discussion of like, oh, look at his paint strokes, like look at the use of color in his work. It was just the fact that he did it. Like it's very much in relationship with the now. It's not, they're not talking about like impermanence, like long terms. They're just like, look at what just happened. This is how it relates to what we're experiencing politically or anything of that matter in this moment right now.
Yeah,
It'd be interesting. Oh, sorry.
No, you can go ahead.
I was just gonna say it'd be interesting to think about how far you could push the actual content before, like in that kind of the way you're talking about, like the action. There is always going to be like a piece of the content that has to fit, like it still has to sort of balance in there. And I feel like in these situations, it obviously did, but I guess I'm just thinking about what wouldn't then, like what would be if he painted something else, like what would be something that would be, I don't really know what I'm saying, but just thinking about the content. I'm getting somewhere. I'll let you know if I get there.
No, I understand. I think I understand like what you're trying to say. I mean, I think that what makes their art specifically like in the now is the fact that it's like street art and that it's like happening in places where it will probably be taken down, or like Ian's example with the shadows being drawn, like that's a very just like in the moment thing that like if that makes sense, because it's kind of like things are moving around and changing what the art is. So it's like if you were to just paint like you know, like a Van Gogh painting or something, like that's not necessarily postmodern because it's not like it transcends time kind of in that sense. But like these pieces of art that are being put up around a lot of the time, I feel like also what kind of makes them postmodern is the fact that like they're being taken down, so they're kind of more like for the present moment than they are for like the future, if that makes sense. I don't know if that is totally what you were getting at, but that's just what I was thinking.
No, it does. Yeah, I think it totally does. And I'm thinking about also like, well, I'm gonna save that for my quote actually. I'm just gonna leave it there. But yeah, that definitely does speak to what I meant.
If you want, you can bring up your quote now so you could
Okay,
discuss
yeah,
what you would.
fantastic idea. I had my first one is on page 113. And I'm gonna start. Okay, so let me try a different formula inspired by the previous remarks on the consumption of technology. I want to suggest that in much the same way here, the form of the work has become the content, and that what we consume in such works is the form itself. So yeah, I was thinking sort of about that when I was talking about content, but my example from the film, I felt like wasn't necessarily the most applicable.
Next stairwell.
The most applicable example that I could have come up with, but I thought it was interesting and I want to see what you guys think. So form and content wise, I was thinking about the tapes and how Thierry or whatever would not watch them and he would put them away, and he had these bins and rooms full of tapes. And I was thinking about what kind of would have to be done with those tapes for it to become like a piece of art that we would view and see as postmodern, or whether the act of keeping them and not watching them is in itself some sort of action that fits into Jameson's sort of conceptual ideas. Yeah.
Yeah, I think actually what you're saying is interesting. And I don't know if I'm totally wrapping my head around the whole thing, but just when you were saying about the tapes, I think, not to like go backwards and bring it back to what we were just saying, but like kind of to bring it back to what we were just talking about, like I think a huge aspect of the tapes that kind of makes them feel postmodern, because I wasn't even thinking that actually until you just said that, is kind of the idea that like because he even says, I think in the documentary, how he's like, they happened and now like they're not happening anymore or something along those lines. And so he's like, so I don't care about it anymore, which is kind of interesting and like kind of almost like a postmodern take, I guess, because it's like they were happening currently like in the now, but then now that they're, since it's like the past now, kind of, he's like doesn't really want anything to do with it, and it's like they were unique then and now they're old and it's whatever. So I don't know if that provides any clarity, but that's just kind of what I was thinking when you mentioned the tapes. So
totally, yeah, I think the way that he himself describes it definitely speaks to Jameson, and how the whole reason he's doing it is to like capture this thing that will never happen again, and then never let it happen again, kind of thing, like put it away, not think about it. Yeah.
I also, sorry, I had to like relook at my notes. I also chose that quote, but the example I chose was, I just wrote, Terry in the film, he says, it is not about rewatching the tapes or filming the tapes, it's about capturing for me. And literally reiterating what you guys just said, but I found that like almost like, I was like, this man is mentally ill, like that gave me so much anxiety, the room full of tapes. And I think the fact that he did this before, like he found this fascination with the art or with street art, is like very interesting. And he's also like, come back to me, sorry, I'm losing my train of thought.
Evelyn, I think you and I are definitely on the same page, because I was also going to bring up just the fact that Thierry's videotaping is like related to the now, and like speaks to the impermanence of like the art that he's doing. Because even though necessarily like his video recording wasn't the art that we see that he produces later on, I feel like in a way it is still related to like the postmodernism, especially just the fact that like after he captures it, it's like, oh, this must be amounting to something greater. And then it's like, no, it's being stored in boxes to rot. So it's not at all related to longevity or it's not about permanence. It's about capturing the now and then kind of just like storing it away and knowing like, oh, I did that and now it's done. Yeah.
Also just don't want to throw a wrench in the conversation, but just want a heads up, we're about like 20 minutes in. So Antonia, if you want to like share your quote, and then we can kind of do not like a speed round, but just kind of like a little quicker go through the second half of our quotes. But I want you, Antonia, to have like time to explain and everything.
My quote was on page 114, and it was when he was talking about like the culinary stuff, and it says, meanwhile, a new form is important in and of itself, and each new item is recorded and registered not only by a written and then computerized recipe, though I think they are rarely cooked again after that season, but by photography. It is the image that is preserved, and you consume the image along with the idea, and indeed, you consume the conjunction of elements in what it is, just like postmodern art itself, a unique event. And I thought this was interesting because it was talking, I mean, it's food, so it's kind of different, but they were talking about how like food, once it's there, it's gone and kind of here and now. And I kind of picked this because I thought it was like a different way of looking at the here and now in the way he frames this. And okay, I think I'm sorry, my notes are a mess, but I think my example for that quote was the boxes of tapes, and he was capturing them because that goes back to the here and now. I didn't do a good job organizing them, but yeah. So yeah.
Yeah, I really like the idea of consumption that you're talking about, because food is like presented to you, you take it in, like what you were saying, it's kind of like an image is preserved and then you consume it. In the same way, I think that's how postmodern art works. It's kind of like in the quote, a unique event. It's meant to be consumed as well. And I think in that way, it speaks to how like a lot of the time it's like a one-time event. Like we talked about like impermanence and how it's like related to the now, but I think it also relates to like the quantity of how many times you consume that. Because just me personally, if I saw Mr. Brainwash's opening show like once, I would never go back there again, because it's like I consumed everything that I could. I took in everything. That image is preserved in my mind. It's a unique event, and I think that's kind of funny how it relates to food, because then like you can kind of relate the consumption of postmodern art to like the consumption of food, which is really, I'm not going to say the I word, but it's important to note. Yeah.
I'm glad you said that, Ian, because I'm glad you said the thing about the I word, because I like in my head as I was forming this thought, I would realize I was using that to form the thought. But I was thinking about how the like the final show that he did was up for like months or whatever. They said at the end it was like he ended up leaving it. It wasn't just a couple of days, like it was open for people to go and see for like an extended period of time. And I feel like that goes back to what you were saying, Evelyn, about it not necessarily feeling postmodern the way that he presented the art to the world. Because initially I was surprised to even learn that some of these people like had like just more than one night as their show. Like it felt like the temporality of it was, it should have been like a one-time go thing, like and then that's it, and you move on and you see something else by somebody else. But the fact that it was there just like a regular gallery would be, I felt like that was, it didn't quite fit into the postmodern ways of similar artists.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I feel like that, sorry, my bad. I was just gonna say that I think that obviously that's been a huge theme of like what we've been talking about, like Ian, you were saying like the impermanence and everything. And I definitely think this is just like my quick kind of summary of that. I feel like his art show, at least to me, I feel like I can conclude was not postmodern, just kind of like of all the things that we're saying. Also, I feel like my next quote kind of pertains to that a little bit as well. I don't think that I think that like the idea behind some of what he was doing kind of is, because like we were saying, like part of postmodernity is kind of like the not like playful, like kind of playful seriousness, or like it's like kind of stupid, but it's like, you know, whatever. And I think that there was some of that behind some of his artwork, but yeah, I just think for the most part it was very like, I don't know, it was just trying to like capitalize off of like this idea, but he wasn't like actually bringing forth the idea and like making art with that idea, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it also, I think that fits back into Antonia's point about consumption as well in that last quote, and just the idea of like an image or a series of images and a unique event, and that sort of being compared to this sort of repetitive thing that you're going back to again and again, that becomes less and less unique.
If Ian, do you want to share your quote next? So we're in the same order, or do you care?
So my second quote was your first one, so I don't
Oh
really
yeah,
have
okay.
another.
Yeah, I forgot we
Yeah,
talked about
but
that. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But we're having a discussion, so I feel like I don't need a second one.
Okay, cool. I can just share my second one quickly because I think it kind of like pertains to what I was just saying. Just the second one I had was on page 116, and it was Marx had indeed analyzed industrial capitalism as a process of abstraction in which the useful product was converted into the abstract value of the commodity form in which concrete skills and work were transformed into abstract labor. And that quote I feel like is very wordy, but kind of like what I was mostly pulling from that was the last part, which is concrete skills and work were transformed into abstract labor. And also just kind of like the idea behind the quote, because I was kind of thinking that I think that not this isn't necessarily like this is what postmodernism is, but I think tapping into the idea of like capitalism, I think that capitalism and like get like gaining like having monetary gain from the artwork kind of like takes away from postmodernity, in my opinion, just from like what I've read and what I've seen. And the example I use from the film is just the fact that people like art collectors started collecting street art. And I feel like just kind of with everything that we've been saying, I think that the collection of it and like the selling of it takes away from the impermanence of it and the fact that it's kind of like a here and now, like this is what it is and this is how like I'm consuming it like one time only kind of thing. And this is like kind of the beginnings of an idea. So if you guys have thoughts, like I'd like to hear them. Just because I was kind of thinking that, and I just kind of think that within capitalism, like everything kind of has to be turned into a commodity. But I think this type of art, like I think postmodern art sits really well as being something like street art where it's not necessarily permanent and it's like there and then it's gone. But that's just kind of what I was thinking, if anybody has thoughts on that.
Yeah, to me, like a bunch of the quotes that we're presenting and ideas we're talking about, they're kind of all coming together. Because for one, like postmodern art, completely sensationalized, commercialized, meant to like be commodified and sell you this product that you consume, and then here's like where something else comes in that you consume, and then you move on to the next thing because it's like I got everything that I could out of that. Now I'm gonna kind of toss it to the side, and then just that consumption and like cycle of like this is what's new and now it's old. Now this is what's new and now that's old. It also speaks to like just the industrialization complex that like you just churn out as much as you can until like people are sick of a certain thing and then you move on to the next thing. And it's kind of like it creates a cycle where like capitalism is always winning because people are always wanting more because of the sensationalization and because of like this is what's new, this is what you should be liking. Like it might not have that much that much content, like it's not really presenting you with any like deeper understanding of life or like what it means to be human. I don't know, but it's being sold to you through this lens of like this is what you should like, and then you kind of like register it in your brain like, oh, I guess it is what I like, until you consume it and then you're like, okay, I'm sick of it. So yeah, definitely I feel like that you're the quote that you brought up, it's kind of like the starting point of like the train of thought that I just kind of drew out using the rest of our quotes.
Yeah, and I definitely think that what you were saying about kind of like just the mass production of things is also really reflected in that art show at the end, because so much of the art that he was making was just the same thing repeated over and over and over again, but like slightly different. Like he was doing Elvis holding the water gun, but in like 10 different colors and in like 10 different ways, but it was like all kind of the same. And even though there is art that like uses repetition like that, like they were talking about like Andy Warhol and like the, you know, cans of soup and all that stuff, like that is that similar type of art. But I don't necessarily think that that speaks to postmodernity, because I think that it's just such a like I don't think that copying and like the mass production of things like speaks to postmodernity. I feel like that's kind of in a way like could be kind of the anti, not that like, not that I'm trying to say like, I don't know, I feel like it's not like postmodernity is like super anti-capitalist and like they're, you know, fighting for whatever, but I feel like in a way it kind of is like at its core kind of anti-capitalist, just because it's not necessarily looking to be mass reproduced and like sold for profit, if that makes sense. But also I don't know if like every person who's producing like postmodern art is necessarily thinking like in that way, kind of. But I feel like street art and graffiti kind of speaks to that, because it's not necessarily, it's not being made to be sold or anything. So
It's funny that you bring that up because it makes me think of Banksy's show with the painted elephant and how people were like, this isn't art, or this is art because you think it isn't art. It's kind of like that. Yeah.
I can share my next one if you want, because it does sort of go into a lot of these like broader structures and things that we've been talking about. It's on page 122. So both are at least in part the result of the situation of globalization, in which multiple determinants in constant transformation at different rates of speed henceforth make any stable structure problematic, unless it is simply a pastiche of forms of the past. So again, kind of wordy, but I guess I was just thinking about the sort of translation of like place as he's going internationally between different cities and things, and the way that sort of as artists would gain notoriety and sort of transform into these bigger names, sort of what that would do, bigger names that were known like across different countries, what that would sort of do for their reputation, and whether that continued to build them up or sort of take them away from this idea of postmodernity. If that makes sense. I'm not totally sure it does, but I was going somewhere with it.
I definitely feel like I partially understand that. Could you repeat the quote that you used though? I just
Yeah.
couldn't find it. I just want to hear it one more time.
Both are at least in part the result of the situation of globalization, in which multiple determinants in constant transformation at different rates of speed henceforth make any stable structure problematic. I'll just leave it there actually. So I was just thinking about all the different factors, kind of like you were talking about, Evelyn, with like the commercialization and consumption as well, sort of like barreling down on just this sort of street art phenomenon and how that sort of impacts it, impacts its postmodernity, I guess.
So correct me if I'm wrong, because I might be misunderstanding like what you were trying to say, but are you saying kind of that like the taking like these people who are like famous street artists, let's say like in LA or something, and then having them like move globally and create their art globally like takes away from the postmodernity of it? Is that kind of what you're saying, or am I like completely misinterpreting?
No, a little bit, yeah.
Okay.
Again, I'm still working it out. I don't completely even understand my own thought, but like I think that the idea that I'm sort of the route I'm taking is the larger the artists get and the more well known they are and the more you might see their work like across this like streets in different places, the less it becomes like that unique one-off kind of idea, that sort of like fleeting kind of exciting art that I feel like fits postmodernity more than the idea of like an established gallery work kind of artist would.
That actually like makes a lot of sense. And I don't really know if I even have also like you're saying like you're still working it out. I don't even know if I really have like an answer or like what exactly I think about that, but like that's a really interesting point, I think, because I definitely see what you're saying because like there were even a lot of street artists who were just taking the same image and plastering it in different places. So it was just like the same thing over and over again, which you could kind of say takes away from the uniqueness of it. But I think also I think we might have been mentioning this, we might have mentioned this earlier. I think that a lot of what makes it postmodern art in a sense is like where it is and like why it's there kind of. So I think on one hand you could say that like these artists becoming really popular and really big and global could take away from like the present uniqueness of it, but at the same time like if you were to put the same image in one area in the United States, it might stand for something completely different if you put it in one area in like London. I don't know if that makes sense, like if I'm getting across what I mean, but I think a lot of it could have to do with like where it's placed and like why it's placed there. But also, I do know what you mean about like the constant reproduction of it in different places, like kind of takes away from that uniqueness and kind of plays into what I was saying about like the like reproduction and everything of it. So I definitely get you, but I'm not totally sure either, to be honest.
Okay. I'm glad that
Yeah,
there's
you're just
something there though. No, keep going. You're good.
your guys your guys' discussion kind of just reminded me about like Banksy himself and how when he started, his pieces were probably like in more obscure places and like therefore less like concerned with like the general public. Like he wasn't that well known, but like obviously after watching the film, I asked like a lot of my friends if they know who he was, and all of them knew who he was. So it's kind of like he has become like sort of like a global phenomenon. And then that kind of begs the question that you were wondering, like, what is more postmodern, or what, like, how does that like diffusion of his work and like the presence of his art in like international spaces speak to postmodernism? And I'm not sure if I have an answer either, but that's kind of an example that you could use to get to an answer, I believe.
For sure. I think that's a good Antonia, do you have another quote that you want to share or did you overlap with somebody? Oh good.
I
Okay.
overlap.
Okay, cool. We're like just about to hit like 40-ish minutes, so I feel like that's a good place to stop, even though that kind of was like an unanswered. But like audience, if you have an answer, leave it in the comments below and, and then we can rediscuss. Does anybody have any like finishing remarks they want to say or anything they just want to finish up with?
I think in general, this one just left me with a lot of
Yeah.
like, I just, nothing that it's like, it's just all spinning up here. So
I think it's
that's a
like
good thing and a
clear.
bad thing.
Yeah, I think it's like clear in certain moments, and then other moments like you're kind of like, wait, I am questioning that thing that we like just talked about because
Yeah,
of this like new development. So I totally know what you mean.
exactly.
But I feel like this was like in general pretty good. I mean, I feel like I definitely took away from what we talked about a lot, just about like the uniqueness and like the here and now. I feel like is a huge part of what makes something postmodern, at least in my eyes, from what we've talked about. So, but yeah, anybody else? Are we good? Okay,
Good
cool.
discussion. Thank you for
Yes.
watching. We're the
Thank you
good
for watching.
words.
Mhm.
Bye.
Bye.